Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and today we continue our coverage of the third year of the Clone Wars. But before we begin today's episode, take a moment to hit that subscribe button down below. Oh, what the hell? Get away, Mark Wahlberg. In our last episode, we looked at the Onderanian Civil War and the Jedi's first attempt to train an insurgency force for asymmetric warfare against the Confederacy. Today, we'll be taking a break from the front lines and look at how the Jedi Order are replenishing their dwindling numbers. Chapter 11, Becoming a Padawan. At the arena skirmish during the Battle of Geonosis, the Jedi Order lost 179 of the 212 members they sent to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi. Prior to the start of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order perhaps lost that many of its members in combat situations every century. The Golden Age of the Republic was a time of peace and stability, and now it was all over. The Jedi were quickly losing more members than they could replace. Now, at the beginning of the Clone Wars, there were roughly 10,000 members in the Jedi Order, but actually not every Jedi was specialized in combat. There were many different professions within the Order aside from being a Jedi Knight. One could be a part of the Agriculture Corps or the Survey Corps, or maybe become a navigator or even a seeker who would go around finding new recruits for the Jedi Order. Only the most talented Jedi Padawans would actually be chosen for apprenticeship by a Jedi Knight or a Jedi Master. Everyone else would end up in one of the professions we mentioned before. But all Jedi do start out as younglings or initiates before they could be called Padawans and be eligible for apprenticeship. They also had to go through a series of trials, including one known as the Gathering. See, tens of thousands of years ago, a Jedi navigator using the Force made a hyperspace jump into the relatively unstable unknown region. The unknown region was incredibly difficult to navigate using traditional methods because of the high density of gravitational anomalies that could be found there. The Jedi Navigator had been drawn to the planet because of its powerful presence within the Force. Although there was no sentient life on the planet, the Scout found several different forms of non-sentient animals. Jedi survey teams were later sent onto the location and found massive quantities of kyber crystals, the key component and energy amplifier for a lightsaber. As per Republic law and Jedi doctrine, the Order quickly sent artisans, scholars, and warriors to secure the planet. It was decided by the Jedi Council that the planet would be kept a secret from the rest of the galaxy. This means it was taken off of all star maps and records. The Jedi found out very early on that kyber crystals were actually semi-intelligent and had a living presence in the Force. The Jedi were always drawn towards these kyber crystals and developed a very unique bond with the crystals they placed within their weapon. They also realized that these crystals had an energy amplification quality to them, which could be very useful for a variety of different applications. But of course, the Jedi were a very conservative and dogmatic bunch. Certain things like the Force and midichlorians, along with kyber crystals, were considered taboo subjects to study scientifically. The Jedi believed that scientific understanding of something like the Force would eventually lead people to experimenting and trying to change the Force, which of course would be very blasphemous and a very dark side action. The Jedi sought to be one with the Force, and the Sith sought to bend the Force to its will. And so the Jedi not only controlled every planet where kyber crystals could be found, the Republic also helped them control the supply of kyber crystals so that it became very difficult for anyone to acquire any of them if they weren't a Jedi. Galen Erso, one of the premier specialists on kyber crystal energy amplification, could only get his hands on larger crystals after Order 66. His research would eventually lead to the Death Star super laser. Anyway, the Jedi on Ilum managed to build a gigantic temple which guards the entrance to one of the many kyber cave crystals on the planet. As per Jedi tradition, a group of the most talented Jedi younglings in their class would board the ancient ship, the Crucible, and journey to Ilum for the Gathering ceremony. In 20 BBY, the Gathering consisted of 6 younglings and Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano, who served as their escort. Once they arrived, they found Grand Master Yoda waiting for them. As busy as the Clone Wars kept Yoda, the Gathering was seen as an extremely important event that warranted his presence. Now, the first step in the ceremony was actually entering the mine, which was guarded by a gigantic ice wall. Using the Force, several kyber crystals needed to be arranged in a certain position to allow sunlight to pass through them which transformed the light into a heat ray, which would then melt the door. This would leave the crystal cave open for a limited time. Once the sun goes down, the ice wall would reform again, and anyone still in the cave would be trapped. The younglings would then enter the cave and harvest the kyber crystal, which sounds a lot easier than it actually was. For one, kyber crystals look quite similar to other crystals found inside the cave, and they were quite rare. One really needed the Force to help them find it. But as we mentioned before, each kyber crystal is semi-intelligent and in a way chooses the youngling as much as the youngling chooses it. But in order to be deemed worthy, each youngling must overcome a challenge that usually tests their greatest weakness. Biff, the cowardly Ithorian, must face and conquer his fear in order to find his crystal. Zat, the tech-savvy Nautolan, relies too heavily on his scanners and other devices and must now rely on the Force alone to find his crystal. Gunji, the impatient Wookiee, must learn patience and calm in order to find his crystal. All the other Jedi younglings died in the cave-in, unfortunately, because the Jedi Order was not up to date with all of their safety regulations and standards. Just kidding, but you get the point. The kyber crystal is an important reminder to each and every Jedi that they are only as strong as their biggest weakness, and as they continue their journey through life, they'll have to make sure that they continue to understand this lesson. The Crucible, for all you Starship nerds out there, is actually a very interesting vessel. While this might look like a restoration, what we're actually looking at is an original Paladin-class Corvette from the Old Republic era. Professor Huyang, who operates the ship, says it's older than 1,000 years, which means it was around even before the Ruusan Reformation. During this period, the Jedi militarized and were fighting a devastating galactic-wide war against the Sith. Professor Huyang is kind of like the Mr. Ollivander of the Star Wars world. Within his Corvette was a small workshop outfitted with every material and item one might need to build a lightsaber. For instance, for the Wookiee Gunji, Mr. Huyang has a special grip made out of Brylark tree, an incredibly durable wood from the Wookiee home planet of Kashyyyk. Now, the actual process of assembling a lightsaber was quite difficult. Professor Huyang provides the instructions to the younglings, but everything must be done through the Force. It's said that non-Force users would be unable to assemble a lightsaber without the Force, which most likely was a safety feature within its design. Now, usually after these younglings have finished their lightsabers, they would have gone back to the Jedi Order Temple on Coruscant for what's known as the Initiate Trials. But this time around, Hondo Ohnaka and his pirate band manages to intercept the Crucible in subspace. The pirates see a huge profit in seizing the kyber crystals and selling them on the black market for a ridiculous price. A ridiculous price that ironically was caused by the Jedi Order's monopoly over the crystals in the first place. The pirates quickly disable the Crucible's engines and board the ship. You might think a bunch of Jedi younglings might be able to repel even the most hardened pirates. The truth is, as we saw in the Trandoshan Wildlife Preserve episode, untrained Jedi and even Jedi Padawans sometimes had difficulties dealing with full-grown adults. Ahsoka Tano, of course, was an exception to that rule. She was immensely talented in the Force and combat. But most of the younglings on board were still children with a limited amount of control over the Force. In combat, sometimes they could be as useless as a normal child would be. In this case, the younglings are forced to rise up to the occasion. After Ahsoka Tano is neutralized and kidnapped, the younglings have the option to pursue the pirates back to their base on the planet of Florum. Using their combined technical skills, they manage to fix the Crucible and fly to the planet, where they infiltrate a carnival troupe scheduled to perform for the pirates. This turns into an elaborate rescue plan, which somehow is successful. In times of galactic war or chaos, Jedi oftentimes got battlefield promotions. Obi-Wan Kenobi was turned into a Jedi Knight after defeating Darth Maul during the Battle of Naboo. And all of these younglings under Ahsoka Tano's care probably should have been considered for a promotion to Padawan automatically. They had proven quite resourceful and capable without any adult leadership and successfully carried out an elaborate rescue mission. But of course, during more normal times, as we mentioned before, these younglings would have went to the Initiate Trials. These were 3 tests that were designed to gauge an apprentice's progress. The first part of the test focused on the youngling's knowledge of the Jedi Code. This included your usual memorization you might expect in a normal education test. The second part of the test actually varied depending on what era the Jedi Order was in. Originally, the second part of the test was designing a lightsaber and building it. After the Ruusan Reformation, the second trial became about self-discipline and demonstrating one's ability to meditate or using a lightsaber in combat with their vision obscured. The Jedi testers in this trial focused on a user's technique rather than their natural skill. The third trial also differed depending on the time period. For those who were in the order before the Ruusan Reformation, this usually meant going on a mission or performing a task. Even earlier on, when the Jedi Council was located on Tatooine, an initiate had to find the dark side within themselves and figure out a way to conquer it. During the golden age of the Republic after the Ruusan Reformation, the final test became about just proving their connection to the Force. After they passed all of these trials, they would go on to the next step, which would be probably attending the annual apprentice tournament. It's kind of like a combine where all of these young Padawans would gather. The students would demonstrate their combat and Force skills against each other in front of a crowd of Jedi Masters and Knights. So basically, I hope now you have this sense of how important these Kyber crystals are to the individual Jedi. There's a very personal connection between the lightsaber user and the lightsaber. And also for a lot of these younglings, this is the first time they've gone on a mission by themselves. And, having to face these personal flaws they have is something a Jedi will have to deal with for the rest of their career. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.